Hi, I'm Darcy Logan. I work here at Casa, and usually I'm setting up art shows, but people don't often know that I'm also an artist, so I'm going to be taking you on a little watercolor journey and showing you a few ways that you can make a landscape in watercolor. And this is one that I made earlier, and so we will be trying to recreate that. And it's going to use a few different techniques. It's called wet into wet. And that's where you let the pigments, dampen the paper and let the pigments blend on the paper. The first thing we're going to do is you might find that some of your pigments are dry. And the good thing about watercolor, so just put a little dab onto your paint, not a lot. All paints come from pigments that are usually naturally occurring. Minerals, rocks, different things found in nature. So they all have to be suspended in what's called a binder. And acrylic paint is suspended in a polymer binder, a plastic binder. Oil paint is suspended in an oil emulsion. And watercolor paint is suspended in either a glycol or traditionally what's called gum arabic. And the nice thing about that is that even when you think it's dried out, it just takes a little bit of water to bring it back to life so that you'll be able to use it efficiently and effectively. So I'm just putting a little bit of... And like I say, one thing you want to make sure of is always wash your brush after you dip it into various pigments, because you don't want to have different paints mixing on your palette. That's what this is. This is your palette. Because then you'll get muddy, dirty colors. So I'm going to start off our landscape by doing a light drawing and sketching it out. And I'm going to draw a little bit darker than maybe you need to. You can go pretty light. I'm going to go darker so that the camera above me can kind of see. Or if you want to try even doing it without a underdrawing, you can do that, but I think it's important. So you're going to put in a horizon line a third down of your page. And you can just do a light line across. The horizon line is the point in the distance where the land and the sky meet. And above the horizon line, you're going to find hills and mountains. That's where they appear. So I want you to do a hill, not taking up the whole page, maybe going down halfway. And then sitting behind that, almost overlapping it, you can do another hill. So that gives us a horizon line and two hills in the background. Next, more in the foreground. And in a painting, you always have the foreground, the midground, and the background. So in the foreground, which is the thing that is closest to us, we're going to just lightly sketch in what might be another rolling hill really close to us. And then maybe in the midground, a little further back in this valley, just another little rolling hill. And I'm going to lightly sketch in a pine tree or a conifer tree. I'm not going to put the whole thing in, just a line to where it's going to be. And the things at the foreground of your painting are always going to be a lot bigger. And as they move back into the distance, things become smaller. And through something also called atmospheric perspective, they become less visible as well. So I'll put a large one in the foreground, and then on this little hillock in the midground, let's do a stand of maybe 3 trees, and they're going to be about that size, a little bit smaller. And I think while we put those in, and our paints have been kind of softening up a little bit, we're going to work on the sky. And we're going to do a kind of expressive, maybe early morning or twilight kind of sky. And we're going to do that using what I called that wet into wet technique. So I want you to get your paintbrush, and you can use either a liner brush or a filbert brush, chisel brush, any sort of bigger brush, and you're just going to put it in the clean water, that's important, and you're just going to put water right here, dampen up the top part. And you don't have to cover the entire thing with water, maybe just some kind of gestural lines, maybe half of the top of the sky. And then you're going to go in with some of your blue and in, and you can see it starting to spread out. That's what the wet into wet is. And I kind of like that. There's some white areas that maybe could be clouds happening, so we'll leave that. You can kind of approach it however you want. There's no one way to approach a watercolor. But there's also no way to fix a watercolor. So just have fun with it and let it turn out how it will. So next, beneath the blue, maybe add some more water onto just the white paper. And at the very bottom, maybe the sun's going down. I'm going to go into my yellow, and I'm going to wash in some yellow. Yeah, it's looking good. A bright, bright sun. Now you don't want to have the yellow and the blue mix too much, because then you'll want green. So as you can see, I haven't really let the yellow and the blue start mingling. But what I'll do is go into the red next and have that blend right on the paper into the yellow, which will give us kind of an orange. But it can also go up into the sky, because red and blue, we know, makes a bit of purple, which is kind of a nighttime color. So you can just have fun with it, you can dampen it more. Go into the red. It's kind of your sky. Mine's maybe a bit stormy looking. Like I say, there's no chunks there. There. And it looks like maybe the sun's gone down behind the hills. That's good. Now what I'm going to do is, because I've got to go through this fairly quickly, is I'm going to pull out my hair dryer and dry areas as I need to. So you can either do this at home, maybe mom and dad have a hair dryer, or you can just take a little bit of time and let it dry on its own. If you do use a hair dryer, put it on a high heat, but a low setting. That's probably good for now. It's still a little bit damp, but that's okay. That'll just speed up the process. Now we're going to do a little bit of work on the little hills in the foreground. So again, just go in there with some water on the white of the paper. And maybe on this guy too. And in you go with your green, and put the green on. Now this is this is what would be called a Viridian Green, which is a very unnatural and dye-based kind of stainy green. So we're going to make it just a little bit more natural by taking a little bit of maybe our yellow ochre, and maybe adding some of that in. If you want, you don't even need to use the green. You could make your own green by, I'll do a little bit down here for you, by taking a little bit of blue. And we all know blue and what color make green? Yellow. That's right. We have Aaron Hagen following along with us as well, doing a watercolor. And then kind of in the distance. As things go into the distance, we see less color, less value. That's like the range of light and dark. They become more indistinct. And often they become a little bit more blue as well. So what we're going to do is maybe across, put a little bit of blue before you add the green. If you want to make it feel like it's receding into the distance. And starting to get happy with that. Maybe I'll just give that a quick dry. And this is only our first coat of color, because we can always go back and add more pigment. That's the kind of richness of the paint. We can add more of that back into there. So next, let's put some color into the hills in the background. So get your blue and pick the hill that would be the closest to us. And go ahead, and you can put this on fairly thickly. I put it on in glazes and stains, and that means with lots of water and not a lot of pigment. That's the way I work, but you can put yours on as thick as you want and as bright and as vibrant as you want. So that's fairly dark blue, that hill. But the one behind it, remember I said something called atmospheric perspective? That one, it's going to be a lighter, still blue, but so maybe put water down on your paper first. Go back to your blue. And maybe you want your hills to be purple or purpley blue. That's all up to you. This is your happy little valley that you're living in, looking out upon. And maybe I will just add a little bit of, what's this? I'll add a little bit of purple to my hill. Oh yeah, there we go. That front one's far more bluey and purpley. There we go. Okay. I'm going to let this just dry up for a second. I'll be back in a second. Okay. So I let it dry down a bit. You might notice, kids and mom and dad, that as the paper gets wet, the paper buckles. That's because the fibers are expanding. When it dries, it usually goes a bit more flat. Sometimes artists do what's called stretching in advance. They stretch their paper out. But in this case, maybe just think about putting a little bit of tape down at the corners or along the edges. This one's a little bit buckled, and when it's all said and done and the painting's done, you can often put it underneath some heavy objects as well. Okay, so now we've got paint all over the entire surface of our little landscape. I'm going to go in and I'm going to put in the trees. So what I want you to do, and this is where we're actually going to mix on the palette. Maybe get some of that richer green. Actually, we'll do it wet into wet. Just go straight to your dark green. And we're going to do like a little pine tree. So imagine that you can see maybe where all the little boughs are. You want this to be quite bold and thick with lots of paint. And then go ahead and on the little hillock in the midground, go ahead and maybe just put in some little guys. And again, have lots of pigment. There, we've got these guys. And remember I told you about the horizon line, where the sky and the hills and the ground all meet? I'll just put a little bit of green and almost just little dots back here, just to suggest that maybe along the horizon there's another little stand of trees. Now, if you want to make your green a little bit darker, an experiment you can try is to get a little bit of your red and a little bit of your green and add that in. Red and green are opposites on the color wheel, which means that if you add them together, you get a really dark color. They don't complement each other. Is that right, Aaron?
That's correct.
All right. Aaron's one of the best colorists I know. A little bit of dark in here. Maybe you just want to lighten it up a little bit, so maybe we'll just add just a little bit of yellow into that green as well, as you can see. Now, the landscape's looking a little bit washed out, so maybe you want to go in there and just add maybe some green, some yellow ochre, some kind of warm, natural greeny colors. blend out the bottom of the trees. Kind of up to you to bring it to life, make it the little kind of valley landscape that you want it to be. Valley landscape. And there's no erasing when you're working with watercolor. So that's why you've just got to be comfortable and have fun with letting the paint just do what it wants to do. Get that till you're happy with your little landscape. And then you can take a moment and you can look at it and say, oh, what would I like to do? What do I think it needs? I think it needs just for these little trees to be a bit darker in there, so I'm just going to dry it. Now that I've dried it, I'm just going to make my trees just a little more defined. You can really see that they're little trees out there on the distance. Maybe these ones, make them a little bit brighter. And maybe this guy. Maybe we need a few more trees over here too. So there you have it. I've done a happy little mountain valley landscape. I'm curious to see how Aaron's is coming. His is going to take a while to dry, I think, because he doesn't have the luxury of using the hair dryer like I've been using. And as you can see, no two paintings are ever quite the same. These ones both have the same elements, the little twilight sky and the hills and the little trees, but the colors and the mood and everything's different. So there is no way to do it wrong. There's only the way to do it your way, which is going to be the right way, if you're happy with it. So the only thing left to do when you're done is just put your signature on it and the date. And we are done. And I hope that I'll see you in a subsequent week when I show you how to do a simple portrait, self-portrait. Thanks.